Hello, and thanks for joining. This is Ryan from conventioNOT. Today's guest is Jon Perry of Oahu Tree Works from the North Shore of Hawaii. Jon first found trees as a true passion while living in a Buddhist lay monastery, and after plenty of soul searching, some really crazy stories, including one about a great white shark bite. Mike and Jon have a personal history together because they worked a little bit climbing trees and staring into the clouds, and we were both really interested to hear about his perspective of Zen, how that applies to the way he runs his business, and how he uses that to stay happy and grounded in his own personal life. So if you haven't subscribed yet, take a second to do so. We're happy you tuned into the show, and here's Jon, Mike, and myself. Mike, turn your gain down just a little bit.
I can see on mine.
There you go.
When it pitches to red, that's never a good sign.
It's getting too much.
Probably.
Yep, okay. That's exactly
I
it.
get all excited. So Jon's keel is perfectly even at all times. I'm like up and down, up and down. Ryan's got a good radio tone too.
I'm actually pretty impressed. This is like, I was expecting Mike to come in with like this.
just to be real honest with everyone, Jon is the guest that is kind enough to give us a second chance because I already screwed this up once.
We had a lot. Actually, it wasn't kind enough. We had a lot of fun the first time, so I was trying to do it for a second time.
Well,
and also when I left the first time, what I thought of is, man, that's probably the first and last time I'll ever get a chance to do a podcast.
Bullshit. No way. No, I honestly, Jon, proper introduction. We're sitting with Jon Perry today. Jon is the owner of Oahu Tree Works. Jon is a certified arborist. He works here locally in Hawaii, but the company works all over the islands. And Jon's going to talk a little bit about how the hell he ended up in Hawaii doing tree work. Jon and my relationship goes back, and I'm always really kind of proud to tell the story of how Jon and I met, because the reality is Jon was like the first person I met in Hawaii. And Nicole was living at that place for a month before I moved in.
Yeah.
And she kept telling me about this other guy who lived there that also woke up in the morning and seemed to have a job,
went to work,
which was uncharacteristic of all our other neighbors. Yeah. So I had this fondness for this dude who, because Nicole spoke of him really highly, and I knew that's good. They're sharing a wall. You know what I mean? It was a duplex. It was like a quadplex actually. But so I moved here, and Jon was one of the first people I met. And to be honest, upon meeting Jon right away, I was like, I don't really know what tree people do. Like, I don't know what a tree company does. I don't know what tree trimmers are. Like, I'm from Michigan, right? McDivitt's my buddy Ryan. He's from Michigan too. I mean,
they don't have trees in Michigan?
Yeah. We got trees everywhere, right? But I never met an arborist before, and we're going to get into it. But honestly, Jon's story is a lot more interesting than like just what he does for a living. But I wanted to give a little bit of background there as to how Jon and I met. And basically when I got here, I was out of work and interested to do whatever. And I think by like the second or third week of me pestering Jon to like, hey man, let me come along. Like I'm interested in stuff. And he was like, dude, you're an engineer. Like I don't really know if you know what we do. Like, I don't know if you're going to really like it. Like, he was very complimentary, but I could tell like he didn't want to bring me along for one reason or another. And again, unbeknownst to me, I kind of not quickly learned, but quickly appreciated the difference in the world that I was coming from and, the world I had just entered. And Jon kind of held my hand along the way, but was kind enough to reinforce maybe that like, you sure you want to go down this road, Mike? It's he does this cool tree work, and I am going to explain it. It's pretty cool. It's not like the neighbor that comes over and trims your bushes. Like Jon is like ziplining through trees with a chainsaw. It's much more cool and interesting than what you may appreciate it as. But he's also a business owner. And, you know, he started kind of with nothing, basically, and he's now grown into this very successful little mini empire here in Hawaii, which is saying a lot. John's from California, and I wanted to kind of take it back to there a little bit, like I always do. But Ryan, I know it's a little bit of a unique interview, and that you probably don't know a lot of arborists, or, you know. But like I said, what we're going to talk about today, Jon is very, very practiced in Zen and meditation and mindfulness. And that's a lot of kind of his background and experience that we're going to talk about today. So I feel like that's more your wheelhouse than mine. I'll be interested to hear how you guys connect on that.
Oh man. As a matter of fact, today I was working on a workshop for mindfulness that my wife is putting on tomorrow for a conference. So we are in that same world.
Cool. Yeah, it was funny because we did the podcast last time and we started getting into talking about a lot of this stuff. And, but it was something I went through a period where I was really into, and, but it was 15 plus years ago, but we started talking about it and then spent a lot of the time talking about that stuff last podcast. So it's kind of interesting, but
I brought it up because, and admittedly, like, you know me, I don't have a hard time like apologizing if I do offend. But I mean, the first thing about Jon that I thought was really interesting was here's this employed guy who's got a business and he knows a bunch about Zen. And like, I just didn't, from where I'm from, you know, like it was a way more of like a hippie type thing. And I didn't unfairly stereotype.
No. Well, it's, you know, funny, what I mean? Because like it is one of those things where it's like you could put different things in categories, as we tend to do, to make sense of the world around us. And some of the stuff doesn't always fit, but it is, for whatever reason, that was the path I ended up on. So.
But Jon's from California too, right? So yeah, that's a lot different, right? In it of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And where I was at, it wasn't as uncommon maybe as it would be out here in Hawaii.
That's exactly. Yeah. I mean, and even out here, I don't know what is common out here. But in the Midwest,
I'm going to butcher all of these cultures, but like, I know there's Samoan culture. I know there's a lot of Christian like basis, and then you have the military mix in, but is there a national, is there a state philosophy?
A lot of people don't even appreciate that. Like the more default is Mormon, actually.
Yeah, that's pretty common.
Mormonism is the more like one of the not older, but more kind of widespread religions here. Like BYU has a campus here, not on the North Shore, but kind of up and around the bend. Yeah, like
I would love to interview somebody who has spent their life in the Mormon faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the biggest influences I had when I was younger was a boss that was a Mormon, and he was very heavily into the Mormon church, like really? His dad. Yeah, he went on a mission and did the whole thing, and he actually made me reevaluate my idea of like that, because at that point in time I thought I just didn't have a lot of like, I don't know, respect for like the whole Christianity Mormon thing for whatever reason in my head, and he made me he's a really, really amazing guy, and made me realize that it's not so much about the religion. It's a lot of times more about the person practicing religion.
Yeah. The practice and just the faith, right?
Yeah.
Like
and how they actually bring it into their life. And you know what I mean? It's not so much about the ideology. It's about the sincerity of the person, maybe.
Yeah. It can be, well, I hate to say it, but the salesman can make a big difference. That comes off as really negative, but just like anyone kind of persuading you, they can affect the message a lot. And that's a really good kind of a segue, but it's hard to get Jon to go back and hone in on these certain areas, because to me, in last time of talking with Jon, I learned some stuff. And again, bear with me. I've known this guy for 5 years. We've hung out a bunch.
There's a thing about a recorded interview that helps you learn some stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You definitely. But I think for me, like what kind of jumped out to me was the reality of like, I've always just known Jon as this guy who had a lot of passion for this particular field, and he opened up a business. In other words, nice and kind of easy to put in a box, and not like simplified, but he's an arborist. He owns a tree care company. But when you talk to Jon about being a teenager and like kind of the steps in the route that got him there, because he didn't grow up with parents that were like in this world. Like his influences in this world of kind of like science and nature, I think he kind of went out and found them. I mean, whether he meant to or not, like,
yeah.
Remind me, Jon, you're like a 15-year-old. Were you more, I mean, I know you grew up playing football, but did you get into skating? Like,
I did all the, like the heart, I was really into football when I was young, and then skating, and then eventually surfing. And then, and I think the reason we got into the whole Zen background was because I found tree work through Zen. Weirdly enough, I was living at it's not a commune, it's a Buddhist center, and I was there full time. Mm-hmm. And I got thrust into this position, not really.
Hold on. You can't just say I was living at a Buddhist center full time.
I figured we were going to come back to that.
Let's put the brakes on. Real. So Jon, I was
19 when I was living there.
All right. So I want to hear about 16. How the hell, just to be clear, I know the answer to this. Jon wasn't doing community service. He hadn't done anything really wrong.
It wasn't like
he didn't get sent away.
Yeah,
like
probationary thing.
And that, again, man, I'm not trying to blow smoke, but
no, I opted. I did it under my own.
That's what I mean. I had a lot of
not
friends
under
at
duress.
17 of all different kind of motivations. Not everyone I knew was like college bound.
Yeah,
but I didn't know anyone that said, I'm going to go do this. Like what?
Yeah.
So again, this is what I help but want to hone in on with you.
Well, the Zen practicing came about because I was probably, more like 16, 17. I was starting to get into surfing, and a friend of mine, actually, this friend that I'm still friends with, this woman, Becca, gave me this book, and it's about Siddhartha, and I was kind of interested, but not heavily. And then at the same time, it was like, how we all have these weird periods where things are kind of like important things are crossing each other, and they can kind of steer you in, especially when you're that age. I think you tend to.
Oh yeah, you're looking for those signs, right?
You're looking for what path you're going to be going down. For sure. At that point, I was pretty eager to feel like I was finding a path to get on.
Were you like a really good student though? Like,
no,
did you get good grades?
I was terrible up until my folks told me, if you want to have a car and drive, which meant I could be independent and go surfing, then you need to have a 3.0. And I got an A 3.0.
The reason why I ask is because, you talk about being kind of looking for that path. And I think a lot of us don't really look for it at 16, 17 because our parents have already figured it out for us. Or, we're just presumed to be going. But
my folks were very hands off, and they were both very, they were professionals. My mom started in the banking industry, and she retired as a vice president of a big operation. My stepdad was a senior editor at a paper owned by the New York Times. So they were very professional, career oriented people.
Growing up California, NorCal, but I always forget where.
Sonoma County, like Santa Rosa.
Kind of inland though, right? Like you were on the water. 30
minutes inland.
Okay.
So pretty close, but I was maybe where my family is and where I grew up is about an hour and a half north of San Francisco.
Okay.
So anyway, football and then surfing. And then eventually I started getting into doing hallucinogenic drugs. Not like it was like a full on, this is what I did every day.
Some recreation.
But I was definitely experimenting with drugs. Mm-hmm. Let's put it that way. But not hard, not like cocaine or heroin and all those kind of harder drugs. It was hallucinogenics. And at the very same time, my grandpa, who I was really close with, passed away. And I was the only one in the room with him when he passed away. So that had a big impact on me in terms of being with someone that died and you being there with him, being a young person trying to find the direction you're going to go. But then also seeing sort of you're at the start and seeing someone that you're really close to at the end, and kind of feeling like everything in between, we all kind of end up at this, everybody, is going to end up at that point. And I just had this feeling, and part of it was the drug experience stuff. And then my own just, wherever I was at that point of feeling like when this happens, I want to make sure that I'm ready for it. That was my genuine experience at the time, was that everybody's going to be in this position no matter what. Nobody gets out of this alive.
That's quite an incredible awareness as a young man.
You're thinking heavily about everything, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, and just knowing that every single person is going to be in this position no matter what.
I mean, I'll be honest.
It's a guarantee.
Well, yeah, but a lot of that's not, I don't know that no one thinks about that at that age, but I feel like a lot of times people that we assume are thinking about that sort of stuff at that age are walking around with like black eyeshadow on and like, you know, they're goth or there's something. And I mean, you're probably blending in.
But it wasn't
pretty normal kid, but it wasn't. Heavy,
but
like,
it wasn't. You know what the interesting thing is, that part of the whole issue, and still to this day, is, you know, we look at death as such a negative, morbid type of thing, you know, and I think partly one of the reasons we have such a hard time with it is because there's this heavy sort of you know, anything
taboo.
We spend our whole life kind of in a way trying to avoid this whole issue.
Yeah.
Eventually that led to Zen practice, mostly because I met my teacher at the time. I just happened to meet him through a class. And once I met him, I just had this overwhelming feeling, this is a person that I want to work with in terms of like trying to explore this path and trying to get a bigger awareness of kind of life and death. That sounds really heavy and all big, but it was really just a feeling of like, this is going to happen. I need to not pretend like it's not going to happen. And what can I do to sort of look at this, try to actually look at it, not turn away from it. And usually when we're not looking at something, it's something that we eventually are either going to have to look at or should be looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So my parents, you know, were amazing in the sense of they didn't really ever try to push anything. They were kind of like, hey, it's your, they gave me,
like your mom, she forged her path, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's, most parents are trying to make things easier.
The best way to explain my childhood is I never really found the boundaries of my pasture. I never found the fence.
I know you have a brother. I always forget.
Yeah, I have a younger brother.
He's younger though.
Yeah,
so
and I have an older stepbrother and a younger stepsister. So I was kind of in the middle. For me, it worked really well. Probably other people, it might not work well. But for me, I like that big open, because I think everybody, you know, you try to put everybody, I think parents, it's natural to want your kids to do things that you think is what's going to make them happy.
Yeah.
And my folks were very wise in the sense that they didn't ever try to fit me into anything.
Yeah.
They kind of sometimes were like,
I'm sure. Yeah. They're checking in.
They're like, yeah, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever, man, it's your life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you weren't showing up all druggy. You weren't, you know, your mind. I wasn't
going to jail. I wasn't landing in jail or
could be a lot
having
worse.
big issues. You know? So, yeah. So they were awesome in that sense, and they were supportive, and that's all you can be as a parent. Really.
No, just that support. And I mean, even it's impossible to appreciate when you're 18 years old, right? But
yeah.
It's a lot easier to look back and know, like, man, they could have been way shittier about that.
So that the Zen thing was an amazing chapter. And I honestly thought I was going to go into it and become a monk, and that was going to be my lifestyle, and become like fully ordained and go down and just be sort of semi-monastic. And I ended up getting into tree work. It's been a really good path so far.
Yeah, sorry, that was a good way. I mean, that we did last time. That's exactly going down the same roads of being at the monastery. Is that?
Yeah, it was actually a lay monastery. So lay is basically, you're still kind of involved in society. You may have a career,
kind of in and out privileges,
but
whatever.
And there's people that live there full time. I lived there full time for, I think it's about a year, but I was practicing up there for a couple of years before that. And, they kind of threw me into this work position where they were like, hey, because the guy I work with, when I first moved up there, he left midway through my year being there. And they were like, hey, you're kind of the only guy that's going to work outdoors and do that kind of thing. So you're going to take his job now. And his job was to assign everybody their work roles for the day, every day. And then also to kind of oversee the maintenance of whether it was buildings or the just the landscape, whatever it was, he was kind of the it was like kind of
the foreman, whatever.
Yeah. They call him the work leader. So I got that role and I was 20. And at the time, I wasn't really like I was aiming for that. I just was in that role suddenly. But I liked it. I actually, once I got in that role, I really took off with it because I liked being in that role. Obviously, that's kind of why I ended up owning a business in a sense. So it fit. But the tree thing was one of the big issues we were tackling. And that's when I first started to work with an arborist. And then, so there was that level of physical coordination, being outside, being engaged in something that is dynamic. Trees, they may look static, but there's a lot of stuff going on there in terms of, and we've talked a lot about this, like the biology and different things. And then there's the whole aspect of a lot of what we're doing is trying to keep them in good condition, both health-wise and structurally. So we're trying to prevent things happen like branches falling or trees falling over, and then keep them healthy at the same time. So it's not just like this sort of brain dead zombie. I'm going out and I'm, there's no connection to the mind and your body. And Zen practice really is a lot about mind and body coming sort of together and not being two different things in a sense. So your decision making is on your own. You live with the outcome 100%. There's nobody there holding your hand. And if you mess up, you mess up and it could be the end. Mm-hmm. And I like that level of responsibility in what you're doing.
I know you're going to blush here, but if the surgeon messes up, thousands of people don't drive by and see it. The surgeon ain't going to die. The person on the table may die. That's a bad outcome. If a barber messes up, no one gives a shit about that guy's bad haircut. But Jon messes up. A, it could be his life. B, it could be someone else's life. C, it could be a multi-million-dollar property that's damaged. Or D, best case scenario mess up is a bad haircut. That now everyone's going to drive by though and see that bad haircut that Jon gave to that tree.
My signature.
Right.
So he goes from a Zen center. The seed is planted that he likes this tree work. But again, he's not growing up around arborists. He doesn't really know how to make a career out of that yet.
Sure.
I was definitely, once I kind of figured out that this could be a path, I got pretty serious about it pretty quick. But at the time, most of my time leading up to this point, I never cared too much about, and this sounds cliche, but I really didn't care too much about money in the sense of I wanted to make a lot of money. My whole dream, honestly, was that if I could afford to have a decent van and live in the van and just float around, I was in good shape. Like
California surfer.
Yeah. Like that was really I was good with that. I don't know. I mean, who's to say, but it's funny because now, like, it's not like I'm rich by any means, but money has come along. Money kind of follows success on its own. It's not really, or not even success. I'd say passion. You know what I mean? It's not about success. It's really about passion because you're not even aiming at it. You're just like, hey, I'm at the top, I'm at the top of my game because I'm really into it. And because you're in that, the other stuff sort of comes with it too. So in some ways, if I talk to kids every once in a while, like or different people that are in different places, I think it's really important to find something that you can really sink your teeth into and be really excited about, because the other stuff sort of not resolves itself, but it kind of comes on its own. It'll work itself out. Yeah, it comes on its own. I think.
Were you always enterprising? So it's like at some point in time, were you employing yourself, or did something happen that took you from a van and a surfboard and the tools of the trade, the saws and such, to where you're sitting now in the podcast? I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think going from, I spent a long time, probably over 10 years, just working for other people or, being basically in a learning role. But eventually I hit a wall where I wanted to do things my way on my terms. And I felt like I was ready to practice it in the sense that I had been exposed to sort of the best guys out there, had spent time with them. You want to be far enough along when you start out on your own to really know that you're going to be successful. If I started too early, I might not have made it. you know?
Yeah. I think a lot of people now get that with the side hustle a little bit. It's almost like this like American, it's I want to say a fad. I think the younger me would have called it the side hustle like a fad, but it's not, right? Like it's a little bit of the way that we do things is to try to ramp yourself up.
Yeah. And kind of like, yeah, I mean, and you know, I'm glad that I waited quite a while before I started out, because I probably, like I said, might not have, you know, lasted very long. But it was really, to start a business was not because I was like, hey, I want to start a business. It was, I really want to practice what I'm doing the way that I want to practice it. I didn't realize I was opening the store, but I opened a whole nother world of learning, and which is great, because the tree stuff's, you know, you can always continue to learn and everything, but the whole world of business is like, it mentally is an absolutely fascinating field, because it brings everything. It brings emotional, it's psychological.
Just running a business, you mean?
Yeah. Just all the things that really just, I mean, it really rips you apart. Business tears you apart. Sure. Just be prepared. And this is cliche, but it's true, to get knocked down so many times. But the most important thing, this is really cliche, but it's true, is you got to keep getting back up, because you're going to just get plowed and plowed and plowed and plowed. And if you just keep getting up, eventually, I believe you can be successful. It's mostly the people that fail, I think, that just wear out and they give up.
Just give up,
you know, and they're not willing to look at what's going on and try to get through and really chew it and figure out maybe a different angle to look at things. And most importantly, evaluate why the issues that you're having are because of you, not because of everybody else. You know what I mean?
Boy, that's a profound statement. I think also it's, and you mentioned it, or you touched on it earlier, when you start to talk about manufacturing something just for the money. You know, part of the reason we don't know much about Zen from our, you know, kind of Midwest roots, I think in a lot of ways, is that it's not really conducive with the blue collar environment that ends up existing, right? Like to be able to have that pasture. I love that pasture analogy that you talked about earlier, John, where you aren't bridled by something that's out there, whether it be a parental involvement, or whether it be an authoritarian involvement in your life, or if it's just your culture that sets those boundaries.
Yeah.
You're so fortunate to have that open pasture to work into.
Yeah, no, I was really lucky. And I mean, all these different things you look at and it's like you won the lottery, you know what I mean? To have all the different opportunities that I've had. And it's like, I mean, you can't really look back and say, it takes a certain personality and a certain perseverance and motivation and everything. And that's really important. But a lot of it is luck. You know what I mean? And I think the more successful you become, the easier it is to lose sight of that. Yeah. But I think it's important not to lose sight of that, because, you know, success has this weird way of making you have sort of grand ideas about yourself. I don't even think I was fully aware of it, but so many things were issues, especially when I started the business, where I kept hitting the same problems. And I just kept thinking I had the right answer. Yeah. And I kept having the same issue. It may not have been the wrong answer, but it wasn't right. At some point, and I think this is where the success piece starts to come into play in terms of why people are successful, because you keep hitting the same wall and you keep thinking I have the answer. And at some point, there's this little crack in the equation where you go, maybe I got to look at this from a different perspective. Maybe there's another answer. Maybe there's another. You know what is right on the other side of that door is success, in terms of that was a lot easier. I have to look at this differently than I've been doing it. For me, it's always been the easiest way. At some point, if you don't realize, it's easier if I just change a little bit. And I'm not talking about sacrifice your integrity or your principles. You might get that one. There's like these weird little milestones, and everybody's path is obviously different, but I'm talking about mine because that was my experience. There's these weird little milestones that happen where I had these certain entrenched ideas, and I'd either gotten them from myself or other people that I worked around, and I had to somehow work past them. One of the biggest ones, weirdly enough, was, and this is something I see in so many people in my industry, is in a lot of blue collar industries is nobody can do it as good as I can. And that's a major obstacle to work over and figure out how to work over it and still get the outcome that you're trying to get.
Most of us have probably never seen an arborist work. And what an arborist is like, first and foremost, man, they're not there to kill your tree. They're there for the tree. They're the tree doctors. They've come because the tree is either sick or there's some human life in danger. Sometimes they're taking the whole thing down, but a lot of times they're pruning a tree. In the process of pruning a tree, depending on what's beneath it, how mature that tree is, what type of tree that is, there's literally countless ways to do it. There's nothing black and white about it. The route they take, I mean, in order to get up in a tree, a lot of times you see these guys in the cherry picker, right? And the crane, and they got a chainsaw. These guys, typically, a lot of the guys doing the more kind of like niche, kind of higher end work, they're all self-supporting ropes. So they're sending ropes up, which they're throwing ropes hundreds of feet into a tree, retrieving those ropes, putting very specific particular knots on the ropes. And they have various like belay devices that can control their ascents and descents. But inevitably, no artist thinks another artist is better than he is. So these guys are extremely competitive, right? Time is of the essence. What sort of equipment are you using? You know what I mean? Like, so one of the things I think that like needs to be understood is if you're going to do this work, there's a couple places to do it, but Hawaii is one of the greatest places to do it.
It is, yeah.
Because the trees grow year round,
and they're awesome.
They're massive. Yeah. So okay. This is,
and we have great weather. I mean, do this type of work in this. I've gone out a couple times to Connecticut, and not in the full on dead of winter, but close to the edges of winter. And I'm like, this is brutal.
Just the horrors, right? Brutal. Yeah. He's like, why would
like all these little things that are terrible. No big deal in Hawaii, like pulling a carabiner off my harness. Well, in Connecticut, you're like, oh God, this is painful.
It's a perfect example, right? Because like a lot of guys that have tree companies in the Midwest, Ryan, John's got a lot of peers that for 8 months, they do snow shoveling. You know what I mean? Because the trees ain't growing.
To me, it's funny because I never expected the outcome, but now business, investing, all these different things have become really big parts of what I spend my mental energy on. And I think to me, it's fascinating because it's a lifelong journey. It's not something you can just figure out in a few years. It's a process that you can take decades and decades. And it's never like you're going to come to an answer, but I think you can constantly refine the quality of your thinking, the ability to be an independent, rational, intelligent thinker, and not fall back constantly on mental models that either you've entrenched or other people have set up, and then try to view everything through mental models. It in there. Yeah. Like, how do you start to really think for yourself? You know what I mean? And that to me is a journey that's incredible to think. And we all think we're thinking for ourselves, but most of us, myself included, spend a lot of our time thinking through the prism of somebody else's model.
You don't figure out how to enjoy the process, you're not going to win either way, right? You talked about luck, excuse me. You talked about luck a lot earlier, and it's true that there's a lot of luck that's involved. There's a lot of luck that's involved that somehow we shaved bears live every single day, right? There's a lot of luck that way, but ultimately, it's not luck that allows you to love the process, and I can't help but think that how that goes back to Buddhism a little bit, not that this is like a religious podcast in any way, shape, or form, but part of enjoying the suffering or understanding the suffering is just so much a part of becoming successful, because suffering is only suffering, save like physical suffering, when your mind gets in the way of your body understanding what is hard and what isn't hard, right? I can only imagine some of the grave errors that you've seen in your career with a lot of those guys that you're talking about, or those other colleagues, arborists of yours, or maybe even you've fallen out of a tree one or many times. It's probably just part of the job, but ultimately, like, it's got to be getting in the truck and driving home and being like, shit, man, I can't wait to get back to try to fall out of the tree tomorrow. Right. I mean, this got to be part of it.
Goes back to what I like about the tree work, which unfortunately we don't often feel in our day-to-day life, is that everything we're doing, the taller the tree and the more dangerous the external situation, oddly enough, the safer the situation becomes in the sense of our awareness, our intensity, everything's really focused. Our perceptions of what are dangerous are oftentimes mirrored by a situation that's much safer.
Jon, you're the most like chill guy I know. Like you are just these all zen like this all the time. But for a living, he puts himself in extreme physical danger. Like, you minimize those risks, but that is a bad situation to be in. I don't care how long you've done it for.
Potentially dangerous.
I mean, no, it is dangerous. You're just safe enough about it to where you minimize those dangers.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing you really like to do when you have free time is surf. You surf here in Hawaii on the North Shore. Yeah. You surf precarious spots that are kind of, invite only, not due to pretension, but danger and like level of difficulty.
People are like, some people, and I think you said it's like, oh yeah, Jon, you're a big wave surfer. And I'm like, no, I would say I'm a medium wave surfer.
And that's a different, I've met a couple of those guys where you're like, you like the danger too much.
Yeah,
you create the danger.
It is
sometimes.
a little bit of a,
right?
and the type of people that it attracts sometimes. Yeah. To find that balance with
what feels like that.
Yeah.
What makes you feel that way.
And also and that is one of the hardest things, especially I think for people that are self-employed and you're trying that, and you have a really big pasture in a sense. But that you've got to dedicate a lot of your energy and life into making this work, but you also know that you need personal health too.
Sure.
And you just do it over and over and try to find what really works, not what you think is working or what you think will work.
That's balance.
Balance. Right? And that's hard. I mean, a lot of business owners, I think, are naturally not balanced.
Oh man, that is the honest truth right there. And the other thing is there's no book on balance. And even if there were, well, I guess there's a lot of books on balance. Who am I kidding? There are a lot of books on balance, but the reality is that there's nothing that has your recipe of balance.
Right.
Exactly.
And it takes a lot of focus to learn that, because what you're describing is going out there and coming back and going out there and coming back. And our listeners can't see it, but on the screen is Jon's making kind of like a visual reference of balance on his wooden table there, which is gorgeous, by the way. That table is beautiful. I see the one you're sitting at.
Yeah, thanks.
So what do you do, or do you have to do things, Jon, to stay balanced? I mean, or is that the surfing part?
For me personally, I start to realize that I've been doing things that are causing my life to be unbalanced when I'm having things come up that seem like maybe they're not connected to the bigger picture, but that I'm sort of seeing like a trail of things. Like I'm having more frustration in the way I'm dealing with people, or I'm just having more of an overall confrontational thing with people around me, whether that's employees or people in my personal life. For me personally, it's really wanting everything to be the way that I want it to be all the time.
It's a control thing.
I mean, yeah, it's like I want all the pieces of my business to work the way I want them to work. And if they're not, I start to wig out and try to fix everything. And then the more I fix each little piece, the more I see new pieces, it just unravels. So it's hard to let some of that stuff go and try to find balance to that stuff. So that helps bring some balance into the equation for me.
Sure.
But it's definitely been a journey. It's not something you wake up on Monday and you're like, oh, I'm going to figure this out today.
I'm just going to do it right today.
Yeah, it doesn't work. For me, it's never worked like that. It's like you just mess up, and then you try to do it a little bit different where you don't get as bad outcome.
Right.
But you really don't. And I mean, it's funny because you have the little breakthroughs and then you have the big breakthroughs, right? And I think you don't necessarily know when one, and then you have steps back.
And that's why you got to keep getting up, because you really don't know when this stuff's going to go through. But the most important thing is that you're scratching at it.
Yeah, your company in the last 4 years. I mean, I don't know how many friggin' trucks he's got around here. He's got cranes. It's a big old business now. And it's beautiful to see, because I know I don't know if Jon knew exactly what he wanted to look like, but he knew he wanted to be bigger than what it was.
It's also, we're on the North Shore. It's a different world out here.
Yeah.
I meet Mike. He's a 6'2", really good shape, good looking. And he's got a huge smile on his face. I'm like, who is this guy? Like, he just came out of nowhere. You know what I mean? Like, even I hate to say it, and it's really not totally true, but just to see somebody walking around with a big grin on their face, you don't see it a lot on the North Shore.
I get that a lot here. Yeah, I don't know if everyone's always
it's
so
kind of like
you live on the North Shore of Hawaii, man. Yeah,
sometimes, you know. But I was
cheer up.
And the other thing about Mike too is that he was actually a huge positive thing for me at that point, especially because I think a lot of people too that get into pursuing their own enterprises and everything, they're always focusing on what's not working. And Mike kept like pointing out all these things that were amazing. And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess you're right, Mike. Like, and he still is like that. And that's a rare trait in a human being. And
for me, I basically moved to Mars, and then I met the guy driving the rover. Yeah. Within a couple weeks, right? I went from me wearing a suit in Toronto to me basically
wearing high-vis clothing.
Yeah, wearing fluorescents, growing my beard out, and only being allowed on the property because I was picking up the tree scrap.
And all these guys around me that are working are like, why is Mike so happy all the time?
Yeah, like this shit sucks. Why is he happy? Well, for me though, one of the things like that I appreciated so much about Jon, my background, like I come from a world where what I do is investigate what happens when things go wrong.
Yeah.
And right away, I mean, it's clear there is an extreme opportunity for bad things to happen in this world.
Yeah.
Immediately upon working with Jon, I recognized like his emphasis was on safety, and second to safety was on quality. A lot of the other guys that were doing the type of work that we were, they're walking around, they're not wearing helmets. They're not, like, their ropes are singed. They're making really dangerous work even more dangerous. Like Jon had these guys that, a couple guys that they probably weren't bound for college until they met Jon. And they met Jon and they had some interest in doing tree work, and that, they realized like, oh shit, there was this girl working with us at that time. Her name was Jamie Lee, was a phenomenal climber and tree trimmer, and like phenomenal to the extent that these are international competitions. She went and she won. She was the top.
Yeah, I think she beat
climber in the whole world. I think
she beat 30 other women from 15. I don't know how many countries.
Yeah,
all over the world.
But like all over the world. So for me, like it was just a really amazing experience. I have a selfish segue here because it has nothing to do with anything we've talked about. But I do have to get Jon to tell a crazy story. No, it's an okay one. He's squirming right now. I'm like, no, it's not that story. Specifically, the shark incident.
I surfed this one particular, we called it, the name of the spot, I don't know if they still call it that, was Far Bar, because it was a sandbar that was far off. Okay. So we called it Far Bar. And so we had to hike down there. There was 5 of us out. One of them was one of my friend's girlfriends, who was actually a friend of mine too, Megan. So we're out surfing for probably an hour, and I just remember sitting on my board and I heard this scream, and it was one of those screams where you didn't have to see what was going on. You kind of felt what was going on right when you heard it. It was very primal. Let's just put it. That's
how far away?
When she got attacked by the shark, she was probably maybe 50 yards from me, or no, 50 feet from me. She was close enough where I could very obviously see what was going on when I turned. She was behind me. So when I heard the scream, I kind of knew like something was up right away. And I turned around and she's just getting throttled by this. What turned out to be, based on all their measurements, I think the biggest in terms of the size of the shark where somebody got attacked and lived. So it's like an 18-foot great white.
So yeah, and I this is probably my own sickness. But the first time he told me this story, I was like, back it up. I want.
You're like, wait, what?
I want a quarterly second.
Let's back it up. I'm with Mike.
Right.
When you say throttled, so she was hurt badly.
She got ripped open pretty good.
The first time he told me this story, he said that the first thing that was aware that something was happening was her scream.
Yeah.
But her scream was with what sounded like a car or something in the water. Like, just, you could tell she didn't just kick a rock. Like, there was power and something happening as she was screaming.
Yeah. It was a very, to me, it was very primal. Like, it felt very like you had stepped into this world that was very,
were going to lose.
Not the
you
safety,
had no chance.
Not the safety net of our general life that we live in.
So he said they all turned around and she disappeared at one point, right?
I remember thinking, or having this awareness of myself, thinking, thank God there's all these, my 4 or 5 other friends around me. And it just happened. And I remember having this awareness of, thank God these guys are around me. Because if I was by myself, I don't know. I'm scared out of my mind. I remember when we were paddling, my arms were shaking, and we're paddling towards this thing. And all I'm thinking is, what the hell are we going to do when we actually get to it?
So
you know what I mean?
50 feet away, and she's kind of by herself, and they like instinctively, basically all as a group, went over towards her.
Yeah. And so we were watching, and that's
not knowing. Yeah.
I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what we were going to do about it. I think it was Britt Horn, who was at the time the head lifeguard of the coast. And he's this older guy, grizzly NorCal bearded surfer, always out on the big days. Yeah. Really like a legendary guy. In fact, his father, Kit Horn, was a really famous surfer in the 50s.
Nice.
Who used to come over to North Shore every winter. He was like game on immediately, because that's like, his mind is tuned to
He's
this.
built for that. Yeah, but that's the reality. We can all sit back and
we're like, I'm like a little puppet in the Grom, just like, that's completely overwhelmed.
I mean, everyone doesn't have that.
But the good news is we're all in a group, so I'm kind of in the group, and you felt safer having all these guys around you. So we just paddled in, and we're watching Megan just getting sort of whipped around.
Is she conscious?
Well, she is conscious in the sense that she's awake and screaming and waving her arms back and forth.
She's got a full wetsuit on, right?
She has a full wetsuit on.
So it's not like, is she bleeding everywhere? Or
no.
What's the situation?
And that's the weird thing is that I saw Megan, I saw this big sort of turbulence all around her, and then some fins in the water, and they're really far apart from each other.
Oh,
so you're like, Jesus, that's a big animal.
That's a large
because you see a fin here, Megan here,
another one,
and the other fins over down that way, and you're like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And it's just this commotion all around it. It looked like a situation that if this thing wanted to eat any one of us, it would be over before we
or all of us. Yeah.
Yeah. It just felt like that. It felt like we were not in control. My takeaway from the whole thing was, and it was kind of eye-opening a little bit, and people talk about it now a lot, is, most shark attacks, I think, on humans are mistakes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And my feeling was, if this shark had set out to bite Megan and knowing it was a human and all this stuff, it would have been over before Megan knew what happened. It would have been over before there was a scream.
It didn't even clamp down on her. It just touched her.
It was like an investigative. The thing, she popped underwater, and all of a sudden the fins disappeared. She goes down, and we're all thinking at the time, because we talked about it afterwards, we're all thinking, oh, the shark just took her under. Oh. But what ended up happening is she still had her leash cord to her ankle. And we think that when the shark decided to take off, somehow it had it in the mouth or whatever, and it just pulled her as it dropped down. And she popped back up a second later or whatever, and Johnny, her boyfriend, was the first one to get to her. I remember he grabbed her and threw her on his back and started paddling. Right. And he was sinking because he was on a little board, and he had 2 people on the board, and he just wasn't going anywhere. So we huddled around her, got her off of Johnny, and he's freaking out. And we're like, no, this isn't working, because we had a ways to get in. And we grabbed her board, which was like floating out on its own. One of the guys grabbed her board, brought her over, and got Megan to get on her board to paddle herself. Gotcha. And we're looking around, no blood, no signs of injury. And we're like, how the hell is she? Because I thought at the time, I was like, we're going to come up to her and she's going to be missing both her legs. Yeah, because she just got ragdolled by a giant shark.
Yeah.
And there's nothing. You see all her feet and her booties sticking out, no blood, no open wetsuit, nothing. And you're like, this is a miracle. And Megan's so disoriented. She gets on her board and starts paddling opposite, like out to sea. Oh. Like trying to get away from us and go out to sea. And her eyes are wide open. And you can just tell she's like, got so much adrenaline coursing through that she didn't even know where she is. Yeah. So we grab her, flip her around. We all go in, get her out on the beach. When we laid her on the sand, we looked down and one of her legs was like, she had a big, you couldn't see it in the water. And she wasn't bleeding out heavily because A, it's really cold. B, she had a wetsuit, which naturally sort of keeps everything tight. Uh-huh. And so, but when we got her on the beach, you could see that she had a pretty massive, basically bite wound on her upper thigh and then one on her lower calf that was smaller. At the time, Britt was there. He's a head lifeguard. My buddy Devin and I had both been through a year of EMT training, and we're like, oh shit, like here it is. And we flip her open, her legs wide open. And when we saw it, you could see down into her leg. Oh, like her bone and everything. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
And she kept trying to get up to look at it. We're like, no, sit down.
Was it on the front or back of her leg?
It was on the side of her thigh, kind of more on the back, I think. And somebody in all the panic and chaos and freaking out says, I think Britt yells because he's kind of in command just naturally. And he yells, somebody run down there and notify the ranger station, which is like a mile down.
Yeah, this is where the mile hike becomes more relevant.
Yeah, it becomes real because we're in the middle of nowhere. And this is a lot of people having cell phones.
Yeah, for sure.
And we're not going to bring a
You're not bringing them down there with you, no.
So for whatever reason, Dave, who's this bigger guy, he's the only guy out of probably all of us that wasn't really fit.
Yeah, lean and fit.
Yeah, he's Dave. And for some reason, Dave ends up being the guy that's running down the beach. And we're like, I remember we're all focused on Megan. And then I kept looking up and I know where he is. And then I noticed somebody else looking over. And then it became generally aware that like, Dave's not making a lot of progress.
Yeah, no, we said the wrong guy.
Sorry, Megan.
It's not out of lack of effort. It's just straight up.
Yeah.
Physical.
He tried his hardest.
He was dying.
He had a heart attack on the way there.
That was and then I think at some point somebody put their head up and was like, who the hell said Dave? Or we haven't stayed in contact. But he was a really good guy. He's in one of those guys that was always out in the water. And great guy.
Megan,
she still surfs that same spot,
but recovered fantastically.
She still surfs in that same area.
She surfs regularly to this day. Good Morning America.
She was on a bunch of different TV shows.
At the time,
she made enough money to go spend 6 months in Indonesia.
Yeah, you got surfers going. So one bite, I get $5,000 for one
just
bite.
one. I'll take it.
The risk.
And I get Surfer Magazine. Yeah. I'm up.
Got it.
But that was kind of. But NorCal was like, man, that was you. And to this day, it's like that. You go up there and surf, and there's always this feeling that you're throwing the dice a little bit. I mean, that could be the case anywhere, but really very felt when you go out in the water in Northern California. And actually last winter, I went out for the first time and surfed the island, which was a spot I never surfed.
Oh, really?
And I always wanted to. And I never surfed it because you got to paddle across this channel that is like the sharkiest, sketchiest channel in the world. Out to this island, kind of like the Farallones, but
which is probably surrounded by sharks too.
100%.
They tend to be.
But we had a buddy. He had this friend that had a boat, and he's like, "Hey, we're gonna take a boat out there and anchor off right off the thing." So I was like, "Okay, I can do that." So
epic or what?
Yeah, it was fun. We're gonna keep going this winter. I'm gonna keep traveling back out there and keep trying to get out there. So.
I'm afraid that probably brings us to a decent way to end it. I mean,
I don't think we're going to top that at least.
We're not going to one up that story.
Great white shark.
Hopefully there isn't any future similar stories to share. I foresee Jon being a guest again. Hopefully
I would love to come on and talk about investing and business stuff.
Maybe I don't need to show up and just Ryan and Jon can talk about investing.
I think that, to me, that's like that's the area I'm really like,
we're working on what our vision will be for next season. And I don't know how much you know about the podcast or creating itself.
A little bit,
I won't bore our listeners too much with the explanation of that, but I think it's quite likely that next season has a different spin on it. And perhaps the convention component might be talking more about how you could become, my heart wants to say like independent, right? But hopefully all of our listeners are finding their own independence, but how our people who come on our show, because each of you have a different world of success, but then you have these other components of like almost like connoisseur type mentalities.
The hustle demeans it. I don't think that gives it adequate weight, but it's a different thing when a successful like CEO type has a side hustle. Because all of a sudden that side hustle is like, dude, you're making more money on your side hustle than most of the people I know, like, because that's just your mentality. Like you're not real good at just nonchalantly doing stuff.
Well, and we find that almost always it is a finite passion. So it's like a connoisseur type thing. And I'm sure, and I don't want to lift the hood too much on the investing part, because I know that's another hour or so or a couple hours worth of podcast. But the reality is that I like to broaden those horizons for our listeners and for myself a little bit, because I could use some tips on investing as well.
I clearly could too. That's why I don't want to talk about it, because I can only listen.
You're close to
I don't
home.
want to be a part of something I can't chime in on it.
I know you'll have to sit on your hands there.
The only reason I think it'd be really fun to talk about is because it is all about like thinking and thought process and how we're like looking at things in different ways. What I like about the investing thing is it's like the more, what I said before, the more we can think independently, I think the more we're going to be able to quote unquote be successful in that realm. But thinking independently is not something that's done easily. Yeah.
When you look back, you realize some of the dumbest mistakes you made turned out pretty good. That's when you were being independent.
Yeah.
It's weird. You know what? You're so correct about that. I'm a student of economics as well, John. And one of the very first things that you learn about economics is that you can't understand anything until after it's happened. And when you talk about that independence, Mike, it is that look back. Of course, you can't talk about things that haven't yet happened, but as a human, it is that look back that confirms your confidence. And it's that independence. Yeah. And if there's anything that should encourage a leap into independence, it should be the type of folks that come on to shows like this. Faith is this weird, silly unicorn. And you have to have that faith to understand that independent part will pay off down the road.
Yeah. I remember there was and I won't go too far down this, I know, because we're at the end of it, but there was this thing, I follow this guy, Howard Marks, who he writes memos and shareholder notes, and he puts out books and stuff, and he likes to poke holes, and it's almost Socratic in the sense that he's looking more at what we don't know instead of what we do know. And that's where he's kind of approaching a lot of this stuff. But he says any major investment decision, if it's not marked with a huge amount of uncertainty, and he said there's been very few successful decisions that he's made that didn't, by their nature, come with a huge level of uncertainty. If everybody thinks you're right, you're probably going to end up with the exact outcome that everybody else is.
I was going to say, not to mention, you're not the only,
which is kind of an interesting thing to really pick at.
You guys call it investing. I'm just thinking about fantasy football. So you guys are talking about real life, and I'm just thinking about. That makes sense, John. When everyone's going after the same waiver wire pickup, everyone wants that guy. You know?
See, now I don't know what you're talking about.
There we go. Now we're speaking different languages. Maybe a good time to hang it up.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Thank you, JP, Jon Perry.
Yeah. Thank you guys. That was fun.
Can you do, if you don't mind, before I always like to give you the opportunity, any sort of connection, communication. I know you're on Instagram. Yeah, if you don't mind, just if people want to reach out to you. Yeah,
I mean, probably the easiest way is on Instagram. I have my company thing is Oahu Tree Works. So that's the name of the island, Oahu, which is Oahu Tree Works with an S. And I'm on Instagram. It's all kind of work stuff related on there.
You should definitely check out.
I do it myself. Yeah. So if anybody, for whatever reason, wants to reach out and they message me there, I actually am the one that is on my phone doing that stuff.
Perfect. I think for our listeners, I want to be clear that Jon is significantly underselling how cool the Instagram is and also how educational it is too. So take a moment, and I appreciate your humility, Jon, but the Insta is really, really, really good. The Oahu Tree Works Instagram is really good. For those of you who, for some reason, are not yet following us on Instagram at conventioNOT_podcast, you'll be able to find, guess what, Jon and Oahu Tree Works. So that is the place where you should be going for that. I feel like I'm pushing my voice now. I'm really sensitive since Mitch came on. Mitch is our previous guest, Jon, you may not have heard, and talked about my radio voice. He gave me these like really nice compliments, which I always appreciate. But like most people, I'm not real good with confidence. I'm sorry. Like most people, I'm not real good with compliments. Maybe there's something about that confidence part.
Now he's a little more self-aware.
I could feel and see my face turning red as I push my voice a little bit. So I think that'll be the end here of the show.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Thank you guys. That was a lot of fun.
Have a good afternoon, Ryan. We'll talk soon.
Yeah.